Welcome back. Thank you all so much. So our coffee breaks are important, we know, and we've created in the program a lot of white space for you to give you a chance to really get to know each other. You've got the magazine called The Annual at your table, and this is your reminder every day that we're together, every hour that we're together, that we want you to be contributing as a guest blogger. Your comments and your thoughts about these sessions is great, but we're getting that on Twitter, hashtag MOTM 2014, lots of Twitter activity if you haven't noticed. But we also want you to do maybe the longer, instead of 140 characters, maybe 1,500 words. So you're all officially invited as guest bloggers. Dave Hahn, who you'll see around here, is the Director of Communications at Meeting of the Minds and the editor of the blog site. We've had 150 guest bloggers in the last year since we were together in Toronto. A lot of rich debate about the themes that we've been addressing, and especially the one coming up. So what's coming up? It's a panel, How City Regions Can Better Attract and Retain Urban Talent. Now you'll see the moderator's name there is not the one that's in your printed book, because Greg Donnelly had a family emergency last minute, and we wish him well, and we thought we should bring his colleague, his partner in crime, Ned Stabler. So you see there his title, Vice President for Economic Development at Wayne State University, which is just down the street here, but let me tell you a little background, and then he'll fill in the blanks. He served as Vice President for Entrepreneurial and Capital Services at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, one of our sponsors. That's a state organization, reports to the governor, that's really stimulating not just the kind of economic development we've talked about, not just the entrepreneurs that we've heard from in the last session, but a wide swath of initiatives that are really making Michigan competitive. And so in that role, he was responsible for oversight of something called the Michigan Strategic Fund Board and 21st Century Jobs Fund. So let me ask Ned to come up and the two panelists who are with him. Thank you, Ned, for pitching in at the last minute. You're a trooper. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Gordon, thank you very much for the nice introduction. I know Gordon already mentioned that I'm not Greg Donnelly from the Detroit Revitalization Fellows Program, which is unfortunate for you because Greg is far smarter and more eloquent than I am. But on the other hand, I'm a lot taller than he is. So I've got that going for me, so which is nice. I also want to apologize. I've only had about 24 hours to think about it while Greg's been planning and the organizers have been planning for months. But we got together, and I think we're going to still put on a pretty entertaining discussion for you. We have a great panel. So with that, we don't have a ton of time, so why don't I just jump right into it. And Detroit, like many urban centers, is experiencing a shift in population at its urban core. During the second half of the last century, residents, especially younger residents with means, looked towards the suburbs as their ideal places to live, work, and play. Success for the talented and educated and upwardly mobile was inextricably linked to the emptying out of cities. But as we saw this morning, young mobile talent is choosing to look at the urban cores their parents abandoned as the ideal place to live, work, and play. As an aside, this is part of why I'm so optimistic about Detroit. For 3 generations, we've sort of been fighting global macro trends as first we saw industry leave the city in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and move out to the suburbs. Then we saw population follow in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then finally, we saw industry leave the region altogether as it sought lower cost locations around the globe. This is the first time that I can remember that Detroit actually has a global trend, that is the re-urbanification, working in its favor. I mean, everything's coming up Millhouse for Detroit right now. We just have to find a way to encourage it and make it continue to work. But there are other challenges as well. So urban environments like Detroit are challenged by the disconnect between opportunity in the 21st century jobs and often an inner city population that doesn't have the tools it needs to access those emerging careers. This dichotomy is particularly acute here in Detroit, with a significant growth in jobs in sort of downtown, in technology and healthcare fields. Whereas we have 25% of our public and charter schools that are adequately preparing our students for those careers and to succeed in college and beyond. So we've got a great panel with Tanya and Darren to unpack and discuss and probe at this just a little bit. And so I think this is a good chance for us to introduce ourselves and why we're here. As Gordon said, I'm Ned Stabler. I'm the Vice President for Economic Development down the street at Wayne State University. My mission and my charge is to leverage the assets of the university, everything from our intellectual property to our physical infrastructure to the talent, the purchasing power, the people, to be a catalyst for growth in Midtown Detroit, in the city, and in the region. And in my spare time, I work on something called the Michigan Talent Agenda, which is a political movement to help support candidates and policies that serve to further the development, retention, and attraction of talent here in the state, and particularly here in the city of Detroit. And with that, I'm going to let Darren and Tanya introduce themselves. Darren?
Great, thank you, Ned. Again, my name is Darren Reedus. It is just a joy to be with you all this morning. I founded an organization called Main Street Inclusion Advisors about 1.5 years ago on the heels of about 7.5 years with a tech incubator based in Cleveland, and then about 16 years prior to that in commercial finance with organizations such as National City Corp and Key Corp. And, my passion has been for many years now to really, bring together strategically aligned and relevant groups that are just simply disconnected from one another. So I'm thrilled to have this discussion today as we talk about attracting and retaining and developing urban talent, because it's some real opportunity with that and some excellent tactics that I look forward to getting into. So again, thank you. Look forward to our discussion today.
Tanya?
All right, Darren, thank you. Hi, I'm Tanya Heidelberg-Yap. I run an organization called Link Learning Detroit, and I am working on a proof of concept in a small cohort of cross-governance high schools in Detroit to radically transform the way we deliver high school education. What Link Learning is an approach to high school that operates best in a career academy, a career pathway, that combines 4 key elements. Rigorous academics, so that means real college prep academics with very high standards, real world skills, project-based, interdisciplinary project-based and work-based learning, and then the wraparound support. And all of this is built around a description of a student, a graduate profile that meets the needs of that student to be successful in life. So this work comes out of really successful work happening in California. Gary Hochelander and ConnectEd, the California Center for College and Career, has been rolling this out over districts in California over the past few years and having a great deal of success, to the point that the California legislature has provided $500 million in funding for these career pathways through Link Learning. So here in Detroit, we have sort of a different approach, which is really interesting to me. One, we're doing a pilot. We're not doing district top-down trying to change. Because if anyone in an organization has tried top-down change, you know what happens. You punch into the blob, you pull your arm out, it snaps right back to the way it was before you punched, all right? So we are working with schools across governance. We're working at the school level to prove a concept that can then be lifted up and hopefully rapidly replicated. And I'll just quickly say, if you look at my bio, I am not an educator. I'm not an educator at all. So I came to this work because I was at actually the same IT firm as Marlon after her. I ran global sales operations for a number of years, and in my last role, I was responsible for internal culture, community, and diversity. And I had twin issues. I had a pipeline problem. We could not find talent here in Detroit to take the awesome jobs that were available in these new shiny buildings downtown. On the other hand, we had the need to attract and retain this highly entrepreneurial, innovative millennial worker that wanted a company that was going to make a difference in the communities in which they lived. So with these twin problems of pipeline and then attraction and retention, what else was someone to do other than to try to start a high school? Right. It made no sense at all. But at the time, sitting in my office, it made perfect sense. Marlon talked a little bit about coming into CompuWare and walking out in 13 weeks being able to code. And we thought that it made sense to try to push that into high school. so that students could actually learn something that was a skill that would be worth having to either go into one of the finest computer science programs in college or come and work for a company. So that's sort of the background, and that's how we come to this.
Well, thanks, Tanya. She also didn't mention in there, although I think it's in your bios that you have there, that she worked for both MTV and Berry Gordy, which is pretty cool, if you ask me. And we're fortunate to have her here.
Makes no sense.
It makes no sense, but it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So we are, we've talked a lot about talent here. We're on a panel about attracting and retaining talent. And so we sort of take it as a given that talent is a good. We need talent, more talent. Why? What's the role of talent? Talent, what is it good for? What are we using it for? Ready,
I'm
go.
happy to take the first stab there. So when we think about talent, most of our work is within the context of what is referred to now in our economic development world as our innovation and tech commercialization ecosystem. What I find interesting is that depending on the audience that I'm speaking of, what exactly is the ecosystem? And so as we unpack that and we demystify that, and you get to the heart of the day-to-day work that is taking place, and let's just talk about the slice of whether it's technology commercialization or high-tech, high-growth entrepreneurship. Why talent, of course, is important to that. If you peel back all of that work, ultimately that ecosystem is looking for deal flow, capital, and of course talent. But all of that, quite frankly, in my opinion, wraps around talent. Deal flow is essentially more qualified entrepreneurs that have the ability to participate in this ecosystem. So how do you attract and identify some of those disconnected urban women, minority entrepreneurs that could be part of that system? Same applies for, let's just say, a majority firm that's founded by, as was mentioned in some of the prior discussions, the standard in the kind of tech space, white male dominated, and it's not a bad thing, if you will, but look at the nature of portfolio companies across the country. You now have, with every kind of angel fund and VC fund, in aggregate, thousands of emerging businesses taking place that by and large, there's a host of talented folks that have no idea that these companies exist. There's opportunities to connect talented, diverse investors to these companies, talented, diverse leaders that could be on the C-level management team of emerging businesses, on their boards, play the role as mentors and coaches and subject matter experts. And when we say why talent, it is at the core of the work, and I think it's so important as we really dig into economic development and the various aspects of it. As we define the work in some detail, we can then really precisely answer that question, why talent is so important to that work.
Tanya, what do you think? Why talent?
For me, it's very basic. Detroit's at an inflection point, and Detroit is making some key decisions. And one of the decisions that I think we're landing on is that we don't have the right or the luxury to leave 75% of our brain power on the ground and unactivated. No.
Yeah, I'll give that one a round of applause.
I mean, and how will we ever be a global player? How will any American city ever be a global player if it doesn't make the affirmative declaration that we need to have every brain at the table and that we have to have the output of every human being that can contribute to our success? Mm-hmm. So talent to me comes down to that basic assumption, and then we start there and start building our talent from birth. We will be in a much more viable place.
So I told these guys that, since Greg wasn't going to be here, I might change up the little questions a little bit and throw in some curveballs. And I think you just gave me a great opportunity to do that, because you talked about the right or the luxury to leave 75% of the population in the city sort of behind. And I think that's important, because for some people, you come to the same conclusion, but for some people, it's about a social equity kind of issue, that we need to make sure that everybody is participating in rebirth. But I want to focus a little bit on the luxury side. Don't we need all hands on deck for this? So the question is, if we only focus on attracting and retaining mobile talent, is that scalable enough? Can we do enough of that to sort of grow the sustainable revitalization that we're looking for? Or don't we have to grow our own? And if so, how do we do that?
Well,
go ahead, I'll go after.
I mean, just the quick answer is, to me, the idea of should we grow our own talent or attract talent is like if we had an oil well in our backyard and went to Illinois to ask if we could buy some oil. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. And we can come back to it, but I think that there are really innovative ways, again, to rethink how we look at high school instruction and starting birth through 8, obviously, but high school instruction to empower individuals to get the ROI out of education in their brain and put the career in the career path and create opportunities for people to actually contribute to the community. It's not about being nice or equity. Yes, it is. It's not about being nice, but it's more about how do we win.
Mm-hmm. And just to build on that, when we think about from even a national perspective, most of your data now speaks to the fact that in the next 25 years, this will be a majority-minority nation. And when we talk about the disconnected nature of so many populations, we can't afford, as was mentioned, to have, depending on the community, 30, 40, 50+% of our folks on the sidelines. Keeping in mind that, getting back to my comment about the work, when you're talking about talent that is, in many cases, right here in your backyard is simply disconnected. You're leaving capital on the sidelines. You're leaving leadership on the sidelines. You're leaving just creative thinking and minds on the sidelines. And I think the biggest challenge is disrupting behavior because we are all extremely busy doing our day-to-day jobs and, quite frankly, doing great work. And so it's this added element of we've got to be thinking about kind of the longer term impact, and the projections are fairly clear that if we don't engage the disconnected communities, it's going to negatively impact all of us, not just those that are disconnected.
So regardless of whether or not the talent is here because it was attracted, and I think we should at some point talk a little bit more about what attracts it, or whether it was sort of grown here and nurtured here, what is it that we need to do to make it feel welcome here, to help it grow here, make it stay here, and maybe more importantly, whose job is that? Is that government? Is that foundations? Is that educational institutions? Is it social institutions? Who does that?
I think that, one, I think we should focus on, how to make people comfortable, how to make capital accessible, how to make our systems work. But I think that people are attracted to greatness and people are attracted to excellence. And if we focus on being excellent as a city and as a region and having excellent services, excellent schools, excellent culture, excellent everything, we will attract and retain people. Now, practically, Detroit has been pretty focused and, I moved back here after a career in New York City, and it was interesting coming back, sort of working my way back into the workforce here. There are certainly things we can do, but the main issue is for us to continue to focus on not just how do we do things like someone else, but how do we find the absolute best, most excellent way to do it and executing on it.
And just to build on that, and this is going to sound simplistic, but I'm a big believer in unpacking. So for me, it's fundamentally about building relationships. Sounds easy enough, but those of us, whether it's personal or professional, know that relationship building requires work. When you're talking about connecting disconnected communities or populations and folks that are, again, as we like to say, strategically aligned, relevant, but simply disconnected, relationship building must take place. You're talking about generations and generations of some real issues that perhaps is topic for other discussions, where there's distrust, there's in the different communities, there's the absence of, certain things have never been for certain populations. So because a shingle has been hung does not necessarily mean folks are going to automatically be attracted to that shingle. So how do you go about fundamentally building relationships? And that is hard work, that is intentional, that is purposeful, and that is sustained. And so it cannot be a scenario where you make one or two efforts and then abandon the relationship building process. If we're really committed to inclusion and social equity and all of us benefiting from this work going forward, it's got to be a sustained and purposeful effort going forward.
So I know, I'm not going to let you guys off the hook on the whose role and whose job it is question. I know if Greg were here, he'd want to throw a plug in now for his program, which is the Detroit Revitalization Fellows Program, run out of Wayne State, funded by a number of the foundations that I've seen here as well, which helps build networks with mid-career professionals that are embedded into various organizations around the city that are participating in the revitalization here. And they come for 2 years, do personal and professional development, build connectivity and capacity at those organizations, work on group projects, et cetera. So that's a very intentional, purposeful, and it's a sustained effort to build those networks. And the foundations have really taken the lead on that. Who else and how should be playing in that role? Is there a role for government in that field?
I think there's a role of government. I mean, from my perspective, there's certainly a role in education, for example. You talk about Detroit Revitalization Fellows and other people who want to come to make change and contribute to the community. I think one of the things that we're finding is that there is tremendous opportunity to coalesce around the idea of educating people, for example, if we have people playing in the right, on the right basis around the field. So rather than having software engineers leave a company and go to a school to paint the lockers or build the playscape, why don't they do knowledge transfer around software design? Instead of having, sort of a walkthrough where students get to go look from the outside in our Detroit Medical Center, why not have intentional internships and mentorships that are organized? These things help to pull together community and invest everyone in the growth of the overall community if we organize the dance, which is a concept that we heard earlier this morning.
I would wholeheartedly agree. I think this is going to, again, sound somewhat, like one of those classic lines, but in terms of whose responsibility is it, while there's absolutely a role for government, philanthropy, our corporate community, and ultimately, from my perspective, it is everyone's responsibility, particularly those that are involved in the day-to-day work that we're speaking of. I'm not going to overemphasize my desire to unpack things, but when we think about urban revitalization, ultimately there's a core set of projects underneath that. When we think about technology commercialization, there's an underlying core set of initiatives and projects that are beneath that. And so those individuals and organizations that are leading those efforts and doing that day-to-day work, it's incumbent that every one of those folks, it's their responsibility from my perspective to really critically think about their day-to-day relationships, even though it, of course, is going to require, in certain cases, stepping outside of boundaries, stepping outside of the normal day-to-day. But if we're kind of forward thinking about the longer-term impact, we have to start bringing other parties, and I'm not speaking in any way of parties that are unaligned, if you will. I could go on and on about so many organizations that exist across the country that are just simply disconnected, that are extraordinarily talented individuals that are just removed from this day-to-day activity. And so by bringing together the aligned and the relevant but disconnected, all of those new entries, so to speak, to our work, they become part of the solution going forward.
That's right.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit. Tanya, you and I are both Boomerangs, native Detroiters who went away to college and then, our early parts of our career and have now transitioned back. I was speaking before this panel with a young professional, well, a younger than me professional, very talented individual who has been working in the community for a while and this weekend is moving to Boston. And I was needling him a little bit about abandoning the work that we're doing here. But let's talk a little bit about that. Is it actually healthy for some of our talented professionals here to, to leave, to cycle out and cycle into other cities and come back? Is this something we should promote, or we're not quite there yet, and we'll hold on to people a little longer before we start saying go? But if you love somebody, let them go, and they'll come back to you, kind of thing.
I have kind of two thoughts about it. One, having done it, I think it was tremendously beneficial to get the benefit of ideas and knowledge and experience in another city. New York City introduced me to billing 2,500 hours a year at a law firm. So, I learned about work ethic and all that there. not that it's not here. But the other thing I will say, though, is that I think it's good for people who want to have that experience to go and be able to come back freely. But I also think Detroit's at a point where there is a certain kind of individual that's attracted to it now. Because there's no place like this in the country that has the opportunity for development, for growth, for entrepreneurship, for vision building. You know, and if you want to go to a place and go to happy hour and do all that stuff that yuppies do, you know, there's probably more work to do that here.
Hey, we now have the world's largest BW3s in downtown Detroit, so you can do that here too if you want to do that kind of thing.
But I mean, I guess the point is people who are comfortable more on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. This is a frontline place, and people who decide to be on the front lines are very comfortable here.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to just quickly build on that, the boomerang aspect, if you will. So I'm from Cleveland, and so a very high-profile example of that, of course, is the return of LeBron James. And so when we think about, on a, if you will, practical day-to-day level, I'll quickly use him as an example of bringing all sorts of talent with him. Yeah. And so what an awesome opportunity there is to reach out to all of the Detroiters and folks from Michigan that are scattered today but would probably love to come back for the right opportunities. And my God, what they would bring back with them in terms of experiences, relationships, et cetera. So I think it's certainly healthy from the standpoint of having some of your talent kind of circle and return. But wow, what an immediate opportunity to, back to my point about being intentional and purposeful, directly reach out to those that hail from here but have left. Bring those folks back. Let's identify some great opportunities, and it'll be amazing what they bring back with them.
So we're just about out of time, but I want to give you guys an opportunity. What did I miss? What is it that you were hoping to say at this panel? That what was your one message you wanted to get across that I have completely missed asking you a question about? Tanya, why don't you go first this time?
Thank you. I actually think we hit on most of the things. You know, the big points for me is that, you know, it's not about, yes, equity is a big conversation, but I think at a higher level, this is just about activating talent. You know, and when you write whole swaths of people off, whether they're women, whether they're the disconnected, whether they're people in the suburbs, whether they're expats, it's not a smart move, you know? And we can change the game in the way that we prepare people to contribute to our community.
Mm-hmm. All right, Darren, you got 45 seconds head start there.
My one message is that it's not easy, but man, is it important. And we're talking about disrupting behavior. Mm-hmm. We're talking about change, two things that by their very nature are generally resisted. But we can't resist this. It's too important for everyone's economic well-being going forward. So with that in mind, change is necessary. Disrupting behavior is necessary. At their core, they're difficult. So let's really dig into the strategies, the tactics that can make that less daunting. But if we really do those things, we'll be in a terrific position going forward.
And you know, Darren and I were talking about this beforehand. Not only is the change difficult and it's hard work, it takes sustained effort over a long period of time. These challenges didn't arise in 2, 5, 10 years, even a generation. It was multiple generations, and the solutions to them. There is no magic bullet. It's going to take sustained investment over the course of many years. So with that, our time is up. The lights are flashing at me. I want to ask you to please join me in thanking our wonderful panel for this conversation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that is a beautiful intro for what we're going to do next.
Great.
So stay with us. We're going to change the set here a little bit, and while the team is doing that, I'll maybe say a little bit about the survey that we have posted for you at cityminded.org/survey. Last year, and this year's group will beat the last year's group, I think, by miles, we got lots of very specific suggestions about how to improve this. We heard, for instance, more diversity. We heard, for instance, mix local and global. Reveal the underlying motivations of different actors, which we tried to do this morning. Try to showcase